So again, welcome everyone to this webinar from the HEA Scotland on designing interaction for diverse cohorts staff development practice. This is the first of HEA Scotland's 2016-2017 Spotlight series webinars. And the aim is to showcase 2 case studies of staff development practice that design interaction for diverse cohorts. Following a brief contextualization from me, we'll have Katrina Cunningham from the University of Stirling and Kath Camps from the University of Cardiff. They will be talking about their PhD certs in learning and teaching and how they embed interculturalism so as to encourage interaction and engagement from their diverse cohorts, enriching the learning experience. The key aim is that these are practical case studies, and so you'll get learning and practical suggestions for the adoption of similar practice. It's useful to note that these are part of a wider Spotlight series for the Higher Education Academy. Our Spotlight series focuses on specific learning and teaching themes that bring together select key HEA and non-HEA resources and research to guide practitioners to relevant material to support them in developing their teaching practice. So the Spotlight series for winter has been designing interaction for diverse cohorts. We'll have one in spring about independent learning and one in the summer about equality and diversity in learning and teaching. And when you signed up to the webinar, you'll have noticed that there is a theory page connected to the Spotlights, and that theory page just gives a bit of an overview of the research and resources around designing interaction. And there'll be 2 practice-based webinars to complement that theory. This one this month, and there'll be another practice-based on designing interaction in February, which I'll talk about at the end. So why designing interaction? Student cohorts are becoming increasingly diverse in their backgrounds, their experiences, their characteristics, their modes of study, etc. And such diversity can create fertile ground for richer educational experiences. We've seen that greater exposure to and interaction with difference, and that's difference in thought, in experience, in understanding, in ways of being. But with that interaction, students, whether that's staff on a staff development program or students on undergraduate and postgraduate programs, can develop improved critical thinking, better collaboration skills, an enhanced sense of belonging and engagement, greater resilience, and a richer, more nuanced understanding of their subject matter. But such enrichment is not an automatic output of the presence of diversity. It's generated from that interaction. However, too often our students and our staff do not interact with those out with their in-groups. So to capitalize on the presence of diversity and to ensure that all can feel like they belong, we actually need to design interaction. And that's what this webinar is about, case studies for designing interaction and embedding internationalization and interculturalism in the postgraduate certificates and CPD programs in staff development areas. If you have a look at the theory, you'll notice that we talk about a variety of themes. It could be internationalization, technology-enhanced learning, large group teaching, small group teaching, and staff development, and how all of these can connect to designing interactions. So I do recommend you have a look at that if you've not already. But our speakers, or shall we say our case study speakers today, are Katrina Cunningham and Catherine Camps. And Katrina's going to speak first, and then we'll move to Kath from Cardiff University. We should note that what follows is a post-webinar recording of Katrina's presentation. You will hear after Kath Camps' presentation reference to technical issues, and this is why this case study was re-recorded. So I'm just going to introduce Katrina. Katrina is the Academic Development Partner at the University of Stirling. Previously, she's worked in higher education as a lecturer of French and education, and also as a consultant in academic practice. She has many specialisms, including internationalization, interculturalism, arts and humanities pedagogies, language and literature, etc. What she's going to talk to us today about is designing interaction for diverse cohorts in relation to her postgraduate certificate in learning and teaching in higher education and the University of Stirling's CPD framework. So I hand over to Katrina.
Thank you very much, Pauline. It's great to be doing this. Thanks for the invite. I'm particularly interested in this topic. Diversity is a term that I'm using almost interchangeably with interculturalism, because in the way I'm using it, interculturalism is about the many differences that we encounter in learning and teaching environment. It's different languages, different cultural backgrounds, different social backgrounds, different learning experiences in the past. It's all of these differences that come together, and in our work in academic development we are dealing with on a daily basis. What I'm going to do is, first of all, just give you a little bit of very brief context. So in the image before you, which was carefully chosen, I know it's quite a violent image, but to me this is the kind of battleground that many of our academic colleagues are facing, not just in Stirling but across the sector as a whole. There's the battles against the REF, against the TEF. There's a feeling of kind of overload. There's Brexit. There's divisional tension. So it's a very difficult context for academic colleagues, and when they come to work with us, either looking for recognition for their learning and teaching or coming to do the PG Cert as part of their probationary period, then I like to create a space where they can actually take a break from this, pause, reflect with one another, and that's key, about some of the challenges they're facing and about, in terms of their learning, teaching in particular, how they can negotiate some of these differences. So we have a PG Cert that runs across 3 modules. The first module is mandatory, and we also have a newly accredited CPD framework, and you can attend, the PG Cert is very much a cohort, so 1 module, 1 cohort, for the different workshops that we offer through the framework, whether it's teaching bites on thematic areas of learning and teaching such as internationalization, whether it's workshops around scholarly teaching, reflective writing, which helps them develop their applications. These are very much, you sign up for a session and you come along, so it's not the same people coming to each one. And I'm going to look at an example from each one in this presentation to see what differences emerge. I also wanted to highlight that at Stirling, as in line with the rest of the sector, there is an increasing number of international staff, and this is a kind of group that I'm particularly interested in from my own background, but also because of the lack of, there's very little research out there on what they contribute to higher education in the UK, and I think there's a lot of, there's a real richness there, and a lot of the kind of beauty of the learning and teaching that's happening when they come to academic development is their discussions with one another are very much a diverse group of people coming together, and that's enormously enriching for all, I would argue. So the first example I'd like to talk about are rich text pictures, which is a methodology that we use in our very first class of the Module 1. Now, we say that if you don't come to this first class for the module, you have to wait till the next cohort, because it's such an important bonding exercise. For it kind of creates this feeling that there is a cohort, and we ask them in a rich text picture to outline their learning and teaching journey until this point, and they then share this with one another. And what is fascinating about the images that they create using bits that they've cut out from magazines or even things they've drawn, variety of sources for this. It's a moment for reflection for them on their journey, but it's also a moment of encountering difference with their peers from across the disciplines and from very different cultural backgrounds as well. And the "You Don't Know My Life" is actually a quote that came from one of our participants last year, who talked about one of her students actually saying to her in a seminar, "You don't know my life, you don't know what's going on, how can you then make assumptions about what's happening?" And to me, that phrase is key to the teaching that I do. I don't know what's happening in their lives, but I want them to bring that. I want them to bring their own experiences to their classroom practice and to the discussions that they have in the PG Cert, that they can actually share some of this and begin to reflect on what makes them the teacher they are, why they do what they do, and how the diversity of the groups that they teach and that they operate within can really feed into a very rich learning and teaching environment, I suppose. So the rich text pictures are an example, I would argue, of ensuring that interaction takes place between diverse cohorts in a meaningful way, but it has to be a safe place, and it can get emotional. We had a participant reflecting on the sacrifices that she had made to kind of get this academic post in the UK, had come at huge personal sacrifice in terms of her family and her own birthplace, which was quite powerful for her, and you could see the others related to that feeling. So it's important, I think, for us to remember that. The next example is a clip that I use for a teaching bite that's feeds into their framework application, the framework and the sessions within this possible way of applying for fellowship. And I actually show the first 4 minutes of this clip in class, because I think the shared experience of watching it together and then getting an immediate response is very powerful. I sent it to you in advance because I knew we wouldn't have the time to do this. And it's a clip by a Nigerian author, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who has written a number of novels, often talking about difference, encountering difference. And this particular clip is called "The Danger of a Single Story," and in it she really illustrates not so much that the danger of only having a single story, but why we must know that it is only a single story. It is only one story amongst others. And the questions that are on the clip that I won't go through because I'm in a recording rather than the actual webinar, something you might want to reflect on, but we find this works very, very well in a diverse cohort in sort of several ways. First of all, in each class, as I said, colleagues don't necessarily know each other, so their immediate responses to this story is a kind of very good way of immediately identifying difference, but it's through the medium of an otherness. So it's not through personal experience in the way that the rich text picture can be. It's much more through this artifact. It also brings out for many, I've shown this several times in 4 or 5 different workshops, and each time there's a number of international staff present, and it takes them back to their own experiences of being an international student, which they haven't necessarily reflected on, and which kind of makes them aware of what their educational philosophy is, makes them aware of their own inclusive practice or not. But it also helps colleagues, international and everyone, to think about the international students in their group, not just the international students, but the single stories that persist, the dominant narrative or the dominant discourse that is present. So it makes this explicit in their own context, and I think that's vital for them to be able to talk about in their fellowship applications if they're going to refer or illustrate the values in a meaningful way. The values we find are often the most implicitly articulated in the fellowship applications, and actually being very explicit about what your assumptions are and how they influence your practice in learning and teaching, and how you might want to address some of this is key to a strong application and to being a critically reflective practitioner. So these were two brief examples of how you might design interaction for diverse cohorts. What I have learned from thinking about this quite explicitly, actually, for the purpose of this webinar has been useful for me, because it's made me think about these lessons. It's highlighted how important it is to have a safe environment, because you're often touching or revealing or bringing up through these arts-based practices, basically, that you're touching on things that can be quite personal and that can be a trigger for something quite emotional. So it's kind of that there is a respect, which is a term that's often bandied about as a token word, but I think it really matters here, and that there's an openness, and that comes, I feel, very much, that's my responsibility, my role as a teacher in that. Another thing that might seem a little bit strange is that group work creates tensions. It can really bring out differences that are very, very fundamental in the way colleagues operate, teach and learn. But actually, that by managing these conflicts and by making them explicit through an artifact, through something other than own experience, there can be a constructive and meaningful conversation around that. And this is something I would like to develop further. It's been written about in some of the work on interculturalism in higher education, about the kind of fact that you need to draw out explicitly what those differences are, and that this can lead to conflict. And actually, it's those moments of conflict that the transformation, that the understanding, that the acknowledgement of difference can happen. It's also, and that kind of leads into the idea that this recognizing, acknowledging, accepting, even you could say celebrating difference, can be exciting, but it is also dangerous. It's pushing people maybe to a place where they're not entirely comfortable. I believe that's how learning happens, but not everybody does, so it's kind of, it's made me very aware of my own assumptions, not only around this particular topic, but also on academic colleagues, about learning and teaching, about my role again as a teacher in foisting my own assumptions, beliefs, methodologies on colleagues, and I think it's important to be reminded of that from now and then. Finally, and I suppose this is very topical, the hashtag We Are All International, which has taken off in the UK, particularly post-Brexit. I have been to a number of interesting seminars recently, particularly the SRHE ones, where academic colleagues are being almost called to arms to address some of the lies that are circulating around internationalization, around difference, around the danger of difference, and that actually it's our responsibility to address this, and to make our students address it. And I see that very much as our role in the year or two coming up. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Katrina, and thank you in particular for being willing to re-record the webinar for dissemination. We are going to move now to the previously recorded version where we turn to Kath Camps's presentation in her case study in Cardiff University. But I would encourage you to email Katrina should you have any other questions. Thank you very much. Kath is a program leader at Cardiff University who has a background in training, teacher education and management, and works especially on just supporting the development of educators, but also has a great interest in oral history. And what she's going to give us a case study on at this point in time is the embedding of interculturalism into the postgraduate certificate at Cardiff University and the designing of interactions in and around that. So I hand over to you there, Kath, for this.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm really pleased to be able to speak to you today a little bit about what we're doing at Cardiff. And just to give you a little bit of an overview, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Welsh context, then explain to you what we're doing within the team, thinking about how we interrogate and introduce changes to our curriculum, and also then wrap up with a few key learning points from our perspective. So as you're aware, I know Cardiff, as you will appreciate, is a research-intensive institution, obviously with a commitment to Wales as well as a global outreach, as you would expect of a Russell Group university, and like a lot of universities across the sector, has both an academic and a professional staff community that hail from across the world. The PG Cert in University Teaching and Learning has been successfully running now for over 10 years, and like many educational programs, explores diversity with its participants, albeit I think historically this has been primarily through a disability paradigm set of lenses. 3 to 4 years ago, we looked at this, and we could recognise that there was time for a review, and we could identify a number of lacunae in our provision. And one of those things was around the Welsh language. And that's quite an important thing for us, because like other HEIs in Wales, we are officially bilingual. So therefore, it seemed particularly important that we should address that. And it was this that prompted the creation of a strategy for language inclusion. And this was a strategy not university-wide, but this was our strategy as a team. I think that when we thought about setting out our curriculum change, for us, it was important to see this not as a project. And you know, very much the sector at the moment is full of project managers and project officers. We didn't see this as anything but a structured, ongoing, iterative approach to curriculum development. And we thought very much, and we were particularly concerned to ensure that we utilised what we already had. So we were very fortunate in that we have a curriculum design. We have 4 modules, of which 3 are linked to probation, and these are very much designed as a spiral, and there are, in amongst all of these modules, a number of themes, one of which was inclusion and diversity. So we decided that we would set out a strategy of where we are and where we wanted to go, and I literally made a start. It was after this that we pulled together a group that became very important to us. They became an act still as critical friends, and that group included participants, bilingual participants. It also included people who were education developers from institutions outside Cardiff, but across Wales. And what we were interested in at that stage, quite early on, was their comments on what we were doing, and importantly, their contributions, their thoughts on what we could do better. Alongside this internally, we were very, very keen to develop a network of colleagues who could work with us in developing our curriculum, but also could contribute to the curriculum. And that's been quite important for us, because it has meant that we've been able to draw upon these people. The other thing that we built into the curriculum change was a commitment to review, to revise, and if necessary, re-envision where we wanted to go with our strategy. So here in front of you at the minute is a very basic model of the approach to curriculum design that we took. So there were a number of stages we could identify. So stage one is where in fact you're looking at is there any activity at all around this particular group and inclusion. Stage two would be where we actually recognize that there is and we're doing some work around this. And stage three might be where we re-envision things. Where do we really want to go in terms of curriculum change for a better intercultural relationship between our staff and our students? And alongside that, there are things that we realize that we're going to have to do. We're going to have to revamp our website. We're going to have to do lots of other things as well. But you can see within this model, albeit it's quite basic, that there's anticipated there is a lot of movement. That actually we might think we're at one stage, but in fact we may, upon review, see that actually we're nowhere near that and we're still working towards it. Over time, we've enlarged that model, and as you can see, it's a very, very busy slide in front of you, and I don't expect you to read it at the moment. But what this has enabled us to do is to perhaps think about where we are at any given time with any particular group in terms of inclusion. So thinking about the Welsh language, then we'd be looking at this model, and I'd be saying, oh, well, we're exploring as a group, okay, and thinking about a need for inclusion because actually there isn't any current inclusion. So where I've drawn that red circle, you can see that's where I thought we were perhaps at the beginning. So what do we do? Well, we introduced apposite changes, or things that I thought were apposite and we thought were apposite as a group, across the curriculum. We utilised the curriculum model we had, and we surfaced the language and created connections with things that were already there. So we were really not wanting to introduce something totally new. We were trying to do that connection making for our students. In this slide, you'll see things that we've included in modules 1, 2, and 3. And I think it's important to say at this stage, these things have been embedded over a period of time and in a stepped way. So this is where we are now after 3 years. It has taken us this time to get here. So in our first module, for example, we look at the context for our new lecturers, and so therefore we introduced something which was lacking before, which was the relevant legislation that actually flagged to our new colleagues that actually we are a bilingual institution. There is an expectation from the Welsh Government, and failing to do that, of course, will have repercussions. We moved away from just a disability paradigm to embedding language and identity issues as part of the discourse around inclusivity. And we did that by changing session design. We also introduced opportunities, for example, for people to experience learning through simultaneous translation and by the use of other languages as well within the classroom. And something new is also intersectionality. If I was to say to you now that we've introduced these things, but these things are still moving, they are not finished, this is part of an iterative process, we're certainly a lot longer down the road than we were, but there's an awful, awful lot more to do. And we couldn't have done it without our colleagues, some of whom needed help in developing their own skills in order that they might contribute to us. But, and this I think is quite interesting, having done this work with the Welsh language, which we use now, we build this into culturally relevant curriculum discussions. We think about how people can actually combine or introduce intercultural activities within the classroom. I thought we'd got quite a long way with that. But I wondered then what would happen if we were thinking about LGBT inclusion. We do quite a bit around this. And so I thought, well, why not use this model? Again, why not see where we are? And what's come out of this has been really, really interesting for me. I asked our participants, and again, we've got a network of colleagues, gay colleagues, lesbian colleagues, who actually come and talk about what it is like to be a gay or a lesbian lecturer. What's it like to work with students, and what might students want in terms of LGBT plus provision? And looking at our model, I thought, my goodness, I think we're at stage 2. I'm quite pleased with this. Still work to do, but I think we're moving on this in a positive way. It was then what I asked our participants what they thought, and my goodness, that set me back on my heels, because one of the issues that came out of that informal evaluation concerned representation. And the person felt that the person we had come in and talk did not represent them. And they were very, very unhappy with this. So it made me think that actually my assumptions might need looking at. So what have I learnt then, both in terms of what we've done with the Welsh language and linking that to culturally relevant curriculum and intercultural competence building within the university, and what I've learnt as a result of using this model for LGBT plus explorations. I think it's taught me, and certainly my colleagues, because this is very much a group activity, is that actually it models something quite key, and that we should share this with our participants, with our students, with our colleagues, and that is that this is ongoing identity work. I've done more work around this than I think I have in any other aspect of educational development. It's made me interrogate my own perceptions. I've had an interest around inclusivity and diversity for a very long time, but it's made me think again about what I think is appropriate, and that whilst there's commonalities between groups, as we might think there would be, we shouldn't assume this. And so therefore it almost feels to me that actually each of the groups I'm thinking about in terms of inclusion have to be approached separately and differently. I need to understand the politics within the group and also their relationship with the politics without. And so therefore different approaches are unlikely to work in with different groups. And it's for me, as the curriculum designer, in conjunction with everybody else, to be thinking about how we can best represent and integrate things within our curriculum. Can I say thank you? And I look forward to discussions.
Thank you, Kath. That was very interesting, and I always find it interesting to see that combination there of this quite structural, we look at the curriculum, but then quite the personal relationship look at what that actually means in practice. Katrina's still having a bit of issue with her microphone, so I would like to go straight on to questions for Kath if we can. And what I might do is I'm going to see and approach Katrina at a later point in time, see if we can re-record her section so that I can send that out to you and you can have that as a separate piece if that is okay with everybody else. So I would invite questions to Kath from her presentation, from the delegates, on any thoughts you might have or practical questions of where you might go. And whilst you're thinking about those questions, I actually have a question myself, Kath, if I may, which is that just instinctively, more than anything, I could be very wrong, when you're talking about what you've done in the curriculum redesign, it sounds like it could be quite resource heavy. And I just wondered how you managed the capacity to be able to do that.
Hello, I think that's a really good question, Pauline, about resources. I think that for me, when I'm thinking about the Welsh language, part of the issue was that actually I needed other people. I am not a bilingual speaker myself, and so therefore I did need to speak to other people. And I'm beginning to believe when I'm thinking about any groups, it is about extending that expertise and drawing into the classroom, into the PGC, other people's expertise, whether that be for LGBT plus or whether it is for intercultural exploration. I think we're lucky in a way, in so much as, and I don't mean Cardiff, I mean generally in higher education, I find, I don't know about you, but I find most people are happy to contribute if they've got the time, and often if people feel strongly about things and want things to change, then they are likely to find that time.
I think you're very right there, Kath. I guess my other question as well is that you did have a lot of people really willing to come and find the time and share their experiences, but that's quite personal experiences. Did you have any recommendations on how you create that space where people feel comfortable sharing?
I think that's a really good question. I have to say that most people that we have come into the program are past participant members. And part of what we do for our PGCE is very much, one of the themes, shall we say, is very much around academic identity. And very early on, our colleagues work on a one-to-one basis with one of the academic team. So they are used to sharing, but they're also, through that exercise, used to feeling safe. And we very early on in that exchange establish that, and I think because of that most people feel able to share, and we're lucky, I recognize that we're cohort based, so I think that helps. So when people come back to the program, they bring with them that feeling and security that the team has purposely adopted.
Thank you. I'm not going to interrogate you for the next few times, and I can see that, oh, we do have another question here from Murray. So Murray's asking that diverse cohorts, as we've seen, is such a complex area covering so many areas of learning and teaching. It can also be a very sensitive area, so he imagines many people fear getting it wrong, and asks, should training and engagement in CPD reflective pedagogic development be mandatory? And as Katrina's still playing with her microphone, I really am going to have to come back to you two, Kath, to see if you've got any thoughts on that. Thanks.
I think that's a really, really interesting question. I think initially for me, I had thought to myself, yes, of course it should be. And then I've been doing some work looking at the intersection between ethnicity and curriculum decision making, and this was with Cornish lecturers, so they were quite a distinct group, and they were telling me that they're not sure it should be mandatory, and I'm not. I thought that was quite interesting, so therefore I'm challenging what I think, and I'm not sure. I'd really like to know what other people think, because for a long time I thought it should be, but other people say perhaps not.
Okay, I throw it back to the rest of the delegates. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? I can see Heather's just typing now, and we'll maybe get some more. And Katrina, you might have some thoughts on that.
Hi everybody. I always think that mandatory is quite a dangerous word to use, and if you make something mandatory, it then kind of is more difficult to get engagement with it. But I think you're right, Mary, that there's often a real fear from academic colleagues about offending people or about getting it wrong. And that's where creating a safe space is really important, so people can have quite open and challenging conversations where they address one another's assumptions, or where using different media can help kind of, you know, it takes the emphasis off the one-on-one or the dialogue.
Thanks, Katrina. Heather also asks that why did the Cornish group feel that it wasn't necessary?
I think that's a really good question, Heather. And I think that actually, in terms of it not being necessary, I think there was an element there about representation and about appropriation, and I think that for them, and they were talking in fairness just about Cornishness and people being aware of Cornish identity and the impact that that had in the classroom, is that actually it was about appropriation, and I think that's to do with the legacy of internal colonisation. So I think there's work around that to be explored still about, you know, might that change if representation was different and people were able to have ownership of things and their group and their beliefs.
Thank you, Kath. I can just see that Heather is replying to that as we speak. And I think, so Heather's comment here is, so a fear that their identity might be misused in some way was the sense I was getting. Was that the sense you were getting?
Absolutely. And I think that that's what's been interesting is the work that we've done informally around LGBT in curriculum change in Cardiff has highlighted that fear of misrepresentation and about ownership, and it's an area that I perhaps hadn't appreciated in quite the same way, but I do now.
Thank you. I'm going to this to a close now because this is a 45-minute to 50-minute session, but I just want to take this time to thank Katrina for her input and her perseverance with the technological difficulties at the University of Stirling. Thank Kath as well for a really interesting summary of the work she's been doing. This will be put up online for you to watch, and as I say, I'm going to approach Katrina to see if she can record something around her piece separately that we can add to this, so that we can ensure that we don't lose her work, as it were. But just a reminder that there will be another webinar on the 2nd of February, and this one's going to concentrate on undergraduate students rather than staff development, but again looking at that interaction in regards to internationalization and interculturalism. It's going to be a slightly different webinar because what we have are two speakers from out with the UK, one from Melbourne and one from the US of A, both of whom are going to pre-record their session, so we'll be showing that pre-recording, but we'll also have a live streaming of Rachel Scudamore's work on designing interaction. But in the meantime, I just want to say thank you to everybody for your patience and your attendance at what is, I would say, a very busy time of year. Thank you.